my second talk, or my second time here at Security Fest, and it really feels like homecoming thanks to Jasper and the whole crew. So I'm talking about anti-forensics, a little bit about me. I'm doing incident response for a living, otherwise I couldn't do that talk, apparently. So you will find me on all platforms because we don't have much time for a Q&A. Just text me. I'm really responsive. I try to answer all your questions. Just give me a ping. I'm also on social media. I blog too. I'm Swiss, I love mountains, I love hiking. Typical cliche, check. So let's get covered. And also please pay attention to the upper left corner because I divided the slides to red, blue, and some kind of purplish because I tried to focus about the forensics, anti-forensics techniques, how we detect these techniques, and then later on how we can improve it. So yeah, let's get going. So mandatory introduction. This paper here, How to Cover Your Tracks, was created or was published 1995. I'm that old that I remember reading that paper back in 97, 98, and I was a little boy, like 12, 13 years old, and I was, what the heck I'm reading here? I had zero clue. But back reading that paper now, 30 years later, some of these techniques of how to cover your tracks in Linux systems are still popular from the attackers. Just picture that one. Clearing log files on Linux, yeah, you're nodding your head because it's silly. And also, I will speaking about Linux rootkits later on in the year on another conference. And some of these techniques used by rootkits around 2000, 2005 are also used by APTs. Isn't that crazy? Because we as defenders, we as blue teaming, we always lagging a bit behind. And sometimes that's really nagging on me sometimes because I think why we cannot be better as a community, as defenders. I know you're also shaking your head. I'm shaking my head all the time. So yeah, let's get going. Sometimes the problem I see is, and also Florian Roth, the famous German security researcher, always if you're following him along on Twitter, you know he loves to start fights with the red sites about, hey, another one published a red teaming tool, you're helping effectively with the attackers to bypass our defenses, to breach the perimeter. And the same for here. We see public available tools which might help you to cover your tracks on systems. That one here is called Forensia. It's an open source tool you find on GitHub. Popularly, it has a lot of stars there. Keep in mind that these techniques here are a subset of techniques you could use. They try to cover or delete most of the tracks we as incident responders use, but it's not enough, as we will later see in the slides. And I love that quote here can be used to test the capabilities of your incident response forensic team. I would say challenge accepted. This one here is from Rob Lee, one of the really, really famous guys in our industry. He used to be, or he is still a SANS instructor. This talk here, Pentest Hackfest, he's talking about anti-forensics. And he asking the question, how good is anti-forensics? And then he mentioned a couple of things like deleting registry keys, Timestomping, file deletion, all the things. Most of these things I'm trying to cover here in that talk. How good is it? How we can reverse some of these anti-forensic techniques? And yeah, if it's still used in the past or still used by APTs nowadays. First topic is cover your tracks. Maybe you know, maybe you don't know, when you are deleting a file in Windows, that file is not automatically just deleted. Windows use something called the NTFS table. NTFS, you can picture it kind of like a phone book. Every file on Windows, every directory on Windows have an ID. It's called the master file table ID. So when I go in Explorer and I'm just deleting a file, that file is not deleted. Even if you delete a file from the recycle bin, that file is not deleted on the file system. That file is marked as free, as to be deleted by Windows. So what can I do as an incident responder? I find traces of an application. So we see here rclone.conf. What is rclone? Rclone is a tool used by, or loved by, attackers to exfiltrate data out of our networks. This software uses a configuration file, despite rclone.conf, right? When I see traces from different artifacts on the system, web browsing, shim cache, etc., on the file system, I can search for this file here. What I'm doing, so please stay in the room afterwards, because two really legends will talk about Velociraptor. The screenshot on the right-hand side here is Velociraptor. These two legends after my talk, Eric and his fiance, I don't know, I'm not sure. We'll talk about Velociraptor in depth. So Velociraptor is an open source incident response tool we can use to query the NTFS, the master file table for information for files. What I'm doing here, I'm searching the master file table for information about a file called rclone.conf. Simple, right? It's just a GUI. Everybody can do that. Surprisingly, I get a hit back. This is from a real incident. The attacker deleted the rclone.conf file, but I still find traces in the master file table. So you see 4 hits inside the master file table. The file was not present on the disk. I mean, on the disk with Windows Explorer or so, I cannot see it. But with forensic skills and forensic tools, I can find that file. Here on the left side of the slide, you see the master file table ID. That's a unique ID every file has in Windows. Again, to recap here, even if I delete the file, it's still on disk, it's still in that directory. With the information of that MFT ID, I can use another Velociraptor artifact. It's called NTFS recover. And surprisingly, I find the plain text information of a deleted file. So the attacker, they deleted the file after exfiltration the data out of the network. They tried to cover their tracks while deleting files, but still I find the information on the file system. Why is that important? Because with that information, that's the clear text password to the attacker's server. So what we did, we passed on that information to law enforcement logged into that server, law enforcement was able to delete the stolen data from the customer. So one extortion method gone. Maybe the network is still encrypted, but they cannot do the double extortion. Or law enforcement still have further investigation points, so they can ask Mega or another online provider, hey, who rented that account? Who is responsible for the data exfiltration? Because attackers know that we have the capabilities of recovering data, they use sometimes a thing called, or a tool called sdelete. Keep in mind, sdelete is super known. Everybody knows about the forensic traces. Sdelete leaves behind the MFT and the journal. It's flagged by multiple antivirus tools as well. Inversosec, so she wrote about it, Hack the Box wrote about it, and sometimes I think all the people in our community are just recycling stuff. You want to talk about anti-forensics? Yeah, why not talk about sdelete? Everybody knows about sdelete, that is not novel content. So I thought, what is the exact purpose of sdelete? What sdelete is doing in a nutshell is it just overwrites the content of the file several times. It renames the file several times to cover the tracks. So that technique here will not be possible again. Funny thing is, again, you leave traces when you are using sdelete. So that's why this slide here is marked purple. We want to do better as attackers. So now I'm a red hat hacker. Turns out, with just a little PowerShell knowledge, I can recreate that sdelete functionality. What I'm doing here is I just manually rename the file multiple times and just pump in random content into the file. Easy done. Not flagged by antivirus, not flagged by other mechanisms. Keep in mind, this will leave traces as well, as we will later see on the slides. So, more deleted file span. Cypher is another native Windows tool used by APT. So on the right-hand side, you see a little screenshot from Volexity. that crazy company, incident response company, who finds 0-day at large scale. Cyber is used by APTs to cover their tracks. So has the ability to overwrite data that has been deleted so it can be recovered or accessed. But maybe sometimes in different cases, it might be enough that you know that a file was present on disk. Just the proof that a file was on disk might be enough to prove that an attacker was inside your network. You might not have the content of the file, but you can say somebody was there. Let's introduce the USN Journal. So the USN Journal, that stands for Update Sequence Number Journal. So in the first slide, we saw the master file table. The master file table is our phone book of all the files on our computer. The USN Journal keeps tracks of every change inside our computer. When I rename a file, that gets logged inside the USN Journal. If I create a new file, that gets logged inside the new journal. So you see, every action I do on my file system is exactly covered and tracked by the operating system. So you see we are heading to, or hopefully you see where we are heading to, because it's really difficult to stay under the radar. Even if you do a slightly modification of a file, that gets tracked here inside that journal. You see here the first red square, that's a service creation. So you see the event ID is 7045, it doesn't really matter. That's just a malicious service created from a real attacker. So I try to publish as much real content as I can. You see that the attacker used a malicious PNG file inside the Windows 10 folder. However, we see that the file landed on the file system exact at that time. Because I have the information from the from the USN journal, from the journal, maybe I can say, I know that a file was present on disk because a service was created on that time. Pinpointing the file name with the sequence number, I can exact say at which time a file was created on disk, even if the file was deleted afterwards, even if I don't have more information. Keep that in mind, we will see later on why it's that important. Again, a purple slide. I, as an attacker, I can easily disable that USN journal. You see the first image from Velociraptor is where I find 24 hits when I'm searching for that particular file inside the USN. If I disable the USN number, I get 0 hits, the USN. It's just one command I have to execute as attacker, fsutil USN deletejournal, and every traces are gone. Does that get logged by your EDR, by your CM? Probably not. I'm not sure. Maybe something you want to try out later in the day or tomorrow when you're back in the office. I'm a really, really huge fan of Elastic. If you are following me online or on Twitter or Mastodon or whatever, you saw multiple times that I pinpoint my tweets or that I link my tweets to Elastic's free open source repository with all the detection rules they have. So Elastic also provides CM detection rules, and one of them is exactly this one we see here. So Elastic created a detection rule for exactly this technique here. Again, if you are building in-house rules for your CM or an EDR, if you are having an EDR, this might be a technique you want to check tomorrow or next week if you would see such a behavior here. SRAM. So SRAM stands for System Resource Usage Monitor. So maybe you remember the first slide we saw from Forenzia, cover all the tracks you can. It's really important that you remember it's really, really hard to eliminate and eradicate all forensic traces on a Windows system, even if you trash all the security logs, the executables, the batch files, caches, application caches, shim caches, etc., there might be places you will find traces of that one. And this one here is a really cool artifact. It's called System Resource Usage Monitor. It tracks system and application resource usage. Why is that such a cool feature? You see here, down here, but no traces of write 86 on that host. Checked MFT and USN. Master file table, no entries of that file. Update sequence number journal, no entries, no traces of that file. But I found traces inside the SRAM database. So you still have evidence of execution, even if a lot of your common forensic artifacts are not present anymore on disk. I think it's fascinating. I think as a red teamer, you have to really work hard that you can really stay under the radar. Again, it's a red slide here. We can stop that SRAM service, of course. We can do an SC stop, DPS, and then restart the service, and such information as here inside the SRAM database will not get locked again. Then I thought, okay, maybe disabling the whole service might be too obvious. That might trigger an alarm. And then I thought to myself, what about cleaning only certain records in the database? Because I want to be a clever attacker. Zero information in the database, obviously somebody tampered with the data. And then I went to ChatGPT and asked him, hey, ChatGPT, I'm a bad programmer, what can I do? ChatGPT came along and said, oh, okay, that's easy. You want to tamper with the SRAM database, take that code here. And then keep in mind, so the first thing is we have a tables array. ChatGPT said, okay, tables, application research usage, network data usage, and then in the upper corner, assuming app name or application ID fields contains the keyword. Basically, ChatGPT said, I'm just skimming through the database. If I find a keyword, psexec, my bad executable.exe, I will just delete it. Enter reality. Okay, no random or no readable content here. The first red corner in the left, on the left upper hand side is the tables which ChatGPT assumed are called application usage, network resource usage. They have other names, and the keywords are not stored in plain text ASCII. They are stored in hexadecimal with a leading 0. So hex number 00, hex number 00. It might be possible to really parse that file. It's not so complicated. If you are more skilled, a better coder than me, a better programmer than me. But in reality, I would say even if artificial intelligence is here to stay, you still have to be a good researcher and double-check the result from ChatGPT. So job security for the next few years. It's not so easy as an attacker to fumble with the data, even if you say red teamers will become rock stars because they now have ChatGPT. It's still not so easy. Okay, PowerShell. I think PowerShell is PowerShell logging is one of the most underrated artifacts ever. I keep preaching that over and over again. Maybe also last year here, I presented the gist of 100 or the gist of incident response cases, and PowerShell was also part of that one. Because what we are seeing here is attackers that love PowerShell. Attackers, when they remotely with RDP enters a server, they log into a server with RDP, they start a PowerShell console, and what they are doing, they're typing their information, their commands inside a PowerShell command prompt. What they might not know is that every command you enter will get locked in a file. It's called the console history. And what you're looking at here is from a real incident again. where we see exactly that the attacker is trying to exfiltrate data. So they are storing data in compressed archives to later exfiltrate this data outside of the network. And you see step by step the comments the attacker entered. Red slide, so keep attention if you are a red teamer here. Of course, we can tamper with this information. We can change the path these log files are saved to. So all your automated tools like Velociraptor and so on, they will try to read the normal path and not from the path you're altered with. So that will fail, of course. This will cause console history to stop receiving logs or just log to a different path. Additionally, it's possible to turn off logging to this file. And I think this might be a comment you want to monitor inside your network as well. So if you have an EDR or CM or Sysmon with command line login, set PS read line option save nothing. I would say that's a big red flag for me. Who else does that? Not your typical clerk, your typical secretary or whatever. Or just remove item. Just remove the file. So when you're a red teamer and you land on a box, maybe you want to purge that file as well. Just before you leave the host, just don't forget to purge that file. Again, Elastic, I'm a huge fan. I don't work for Elastic. Our customers don't use Elastic, so don't get me wrong, I don't get paid for making advertisement for Elastic, but they provide open source rules. They thought about that process probably longer than you guys did. So what I'm doing frequently, I go to that repository and I browse the artifacts. I browse the source code because I want to learn. Do I know all the techniques? I'm able to spot all these techniques, which forensic sources they use to pinpoint that techniques from an attacker. You can learn so much just for browsing this artifact here. And what we are seeing here, they flagging the event action deletion and file name console history. So exactly what we are doing here, just purging traces. You, as a red teamer, might also use this information to adjust your strings so that you can fly under the radar. So when you are purging your tracks or cover your tracks, you might want to have a look here what the blue time might detect. There is also a thing called PowerShell transcript. Besides all these files here, so console history, we also have a transcript files which might log your data. So keep that in mind. There are different places we can find PowerShell traces. What Turla, the Russian APT group, did, they disabled the Windows event tracing. You see here that little PowerShell code. With such little lines of PowerShell code, you can effectively disabling Windows login. It's a super, super effective technique which doesn't require that much. And you can, with C# or with inline PowerShell, you can run that in your shellcode loader or your dropper. This is one of these techniques you might want to test. So when you are a detection engineer or an incident responder, you might want to check out this technique here. It's still super useful and still used by APTs. Coming back to the talk from Rob Lee, one of his slides was 2 tell signs of time-stomping. That technique here is frequently taught and still presented in SANS classes. They say, hey, time-stopping is a thing, time-stopping is used by attackers. All you have to do is just look for these 2 signs. We see, or if you are not familiar with, Windows have different timestamps. So Windows use timestamps for the file name, and Windows use timestamps for the actual file. So when you are creating a file, Windows creates 16 or more timestamps. You can only manipulate via API the file name API, so on the left-hand side. They say, Rob, please say here, because attackers cannot modify the file name timestamp, or no, the file timestamp on the master file table, just look out for different results. If the file timestamps don't align, you might have a problem, or you might have timestomping here. Next is these all 0 fraction seconds, they get repeated all over again. Everybody say, just look for that one, that's a clear sign of timestomping. Coming again to Velociraptor, Mike Cohen, one of the core developers of Velociraptor, said, we developed a new feature, it's called suspect timestomping. So you see that little clock here. So when you see that one, you might have a file which was timestopped by the attacker. In my test, so that's a screenshot from one of my tests from my virtual machine, we see that the birth time is younger. So on the left-hand side, you see the birth time of the file name. So again, Windows keeps tracks of different file time of different timestamps. One of these timestamps on the left-hand side is really the metadata of the file. When was the metadata of the file created? On the right-hand side, we see the timestomping, the time information of the file, the information in the master file table. These files are not, these timestamps are not the same, as you can clearly see. So one was 2 years before. And Velociraptor said, yeah, of course not. I see it that it doesn't align, so I have a problem here. Somebody tampered with the data. And now comes really the funny thing. Fun fact, if you want to timestamp the file name type, all you have to do is just rename the file, rename it back, and then Windows use the time information from the file name and apply it to the file name, so for the master file table. And you have a clearly just timestamp the file. Okay. Now we are heading to the Linux part of this presentation. You see here a slide from Mandiant, the incident response company. They're saying, this is one from January from this year. They say the attackers, after they gain a foothold on that machine, they use dmessage. So dmessage is a kernel ring buffer who holds all the information on your Linux system. They tampered with the information here because they cleared the ring buffer, the dmessage. And you see that this one is a techniques used by APTs. So this is not your average ransomware cruise on this was an APT. We can see that here because the first message, dmessage, we clearly see that somebody, me, loaded the malicious rootkit on that server. So you see module verification failed, loading out of 3 module taints kernel. That's a clear telltale sign that somebody was on that server installing something malicious, or at least unverified. The second comment here, you see dmessage -c, and then again dmessage, and you see that all the dmessages were cleared. So I don't have more information. So the same exact behavior as used by APTs here. Funny thing is, we still have that same exact information stored in a plain text file in our server. So you see varlog kern, so the kern.log message still holds the same information as the dmessage. Coming back to that slide here, even if the attackers clear dmessage, it doesn't matter. Why it doesn't matter? Because we still have information here, the exact same information. What does this tell us? Because when you don't have that much information about operating systems, about system administration tasks, you might think it's enough just to clear dmessage here. No, it's not enough. And that's why it's such a tricky business to be really a good pen tester or a really good APT. Because when you are dealing with a good forensicator, we still have a ton of possibilities to find you in our systems. Same here. Then you come, a clever APT comes along and think, okay, clearing dmessage might not be enough. Then I'm removing that kern.log file here. Nope, still not enough. Modern Linux systems, they use a thing called journaling or journal daemon. Inside this journal daemon file, you still find the exact same information. So you see, it's really, really hard for an attacker to stay under the radar. Even if they think, I'm clever, I'm purging my tracks, I'm covering my tracks. Nope, still still a lot of possibilities to find you on a system. We see journaling is a really good thing. Then another attacker come and say, okay, I know that you can use the journal. I will clear the journal. Let's see. Again, from Mandiant called it Steel Corgi. And they said, one of the sneakiest comments we notice is the bleach one. They're clearing various messages, they're clearing various log files. And then they said, it's clear that the usage of the bleach parameter during intrusion results in hard times for your incident response team. Okay, is that true? Because the attackers here cleared all the authentication log. You see var log auth.log. So every time you log into a Linux server, that gets logged in a log file. The attacker here cleared the log files, and they thought, we are clever, we're clearing our tracks. However, again, in the journal, we see the exact logging information. The IP address, the username, accepted, denied. If you don't know about the journal or clearing the journal, you might still leave traces on the system. Purple slide, we can clear the journal. Journal CTL -- rotate clears all the information in the journal. So if you are doing a pen test and you don't want to leave traces, keep that in mind. You can purge the journal as well. However, clearing logs generates other logs. It's the same as clearing logs in Windows. When you clear the event logs in Windows, that creates an entry that the logs were cleared. When you're clearing the journal, that generates a log, or it generates a log message that the journal was cleared. So again, it's really hard to stay under the radar. When you see such a message here that the logs were rotated or the journal was deleted, you might want to investigate that system. However, who will notice it anyway? Who will notice such a behavior here? Somebody on your Linux server is rotating the journal in order to cover the tracks. I personally, as a detection engineer, incident responder, internal security team member, I would check that, because Elastic Security doesn't have a rule for that one here. It's always about thinking about the gaps, checking the gaps. Do I have missing points as a defender? Keeping, again, on the Linux side here, bash history. You know, Hal Pomeranz, he's one of the legends when it comes to Linux forensics and Linux stuff. And he had a talk also in the SANS Security Summit, and he said anti-forensics. We can just disable the bash history. So every comment you enter in your Linux shells get stored inside a file called the bash history. And then, as an investigator, I just can look at the history and I see all the traces from the attacker. Easy enough, right? Anti-forensic here shows us that it's not so easy, or at least Hal said it is easy. When you want to work in our team, we have a little challenge prepared for new employees. One of the employees, Katarina, she's a woman, I'm really proud that she joined our team. I gave her the challenge and I used the exact same comments as here to cover my traces, so that while setting up the challenge, I will not leave traces on the box. What Katarina did was she was just dumping the memory from the server and use a volatility plugin to get the bash history out. Because funny thing is, even if you are using a tool or exporting the bash history pointing to null, your comments will be stored in memory. Bash history gets written back when you log out. until then, it's stored in memory, and we as Defender, we can find traces in memory exactly what you did. So all the comments there were my comments entered, and she found it easily. There's a thing or a tool called ProC. It was designed by attackers to search the memory on Linux boxes for clear text passwords, but we as Defender, we can use the same tool to dump processes, to find signs of attackers, so signs of common strings. I have to, 5 minutes left, I know. I have to jump to the next, it will be the last one, so I think I have still time. A stealthier approach, this one is a purple slide. What I will probably do is I would use another shell like bash, because the older Linux shell, sh, doesn't have a history, and volatility doesn't have a parser for that shell here. So I still comply under the radar. It's really about also as an attacker finding the gaps. Last one, 5 minutes, go ahead. This one is really, really one of the coolest things I saw in the recent months, because there is a thing called a dynamic loader within Linux. The dynamic loader is responsible for dynamically linking all your binaries in your program. Funny thing is, I can pass an argument to a legitimate executable directly to the loader, like here. So that lib linux root anti-loader, and the root anti-loader is just my program. And it gets perfectly executed. Why is that important and so useful? Short detour here. I presented in B-Sides Munich last year about /proc. If you haven't seen that presentation, that might give you more background about what I'm talking here. The gist of it is, when an executable runs under Linux, and you can delete that file, it's still stored inside the /proc directory. What we can do as blue teamer, we go to the /proc directory and we copy out that file, even if it's deleted on disk, because it's running and it's running in memory. See here, it's just easy enough, just copy out the executable. However, when we do the same, so when we are using our little trick here with the Linux dynamic linker, when the blue teamers go to the /proc/pit directory, all we see is not the actual executable, but we see only the loader. So our malicious tool is not stored in memory, or not easily stored in memory. All is not lost. As blue teamers, we know a little tricks, or a trick more maybe than the attacker. The memory or the executable file, in order to running on the Linux system, must of course be stored in memory somewhere. We can go check the memory regions here, and with a little help from a Python script, we can dump all that memory, reconstruct it in the right order, and we get an ELF file back. So even if the attackers try to be really smart and say, hey, we use a different technique, and the blue teamer will not be able to find traces of that executable, all we can do is Python magic, and I get a file back. And that's it. And 2 minutes, please. If you think that was all basic, I know all that stuff, I'm hiring, we are an English-speaking team. If you want to join us, please feel free, send me a message. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Stephan. I got 1 minute, 32 seconds left. Good work. Yeah, but please find Stephan afterwards if you have any questions. Thank you. And stay put. Don't go anywhere. I see you're going. Sir, stop resisting!